So, welcome everyone. This is thrilling to see people coming for these events. I think some of you have been to the Thinking Spot before. This is probably the first time coming in. So thank you to my wife. So I'm her assistant. Just some interesting stories. I'll let Kevin and Ravi, of course, introduce themselves. And Kevin's going to kind of have a conversation, but let's chime in. So Rima, about 2020 during COVID, everybody has heard about the Great Resignation. So she was part of the Great Resignation. So she tells me she's got a great corporate job, awesome. She says, Arun, I think we're done. I'm done. I'm like, okay, great. So what do you want to do? Good job. She's like, I'm going to open a bookstore. Okay, physical bookstore? Right, it's like salmon going against the screen. Like, okay, and then she narrows it down to like, I'm going to do just science, technology, engineering, math. I'm like, okay, all right. So we've seen from a business standpoint, and but it's been 3 years, and it's been progressing quite a bit because what we realized is the community matters, right? You can always get to go Amazon and all that, but is this community? So it's one of those things where these events are like really the lifeblood of this, so I'm very grateful, so thank you. Story about Kevin and Ravi is very interesting. I was at, I know Ravi off and on through connections, of course, a lot of UFM friends will know that. So that was one, but I was working at Optum with Dan and others and Kevin about in 2017. So I landed as a VP of engineering driving AI, which we're talking about. It's just so small world. And the first week, I got email from my boss saying that, Arun, there is this excellent business analytics course. It will be a good refresher for you. Go for it. I'm like, I look at the coursework, I'm like, this is awesome, right? And like, really? I get it? So I reached out to Kevin, because Kevin was like, he was getting calls all the time. And there was only spot where I said, Kevin, I gotta get into this, right? Let me introduce myself. I said, don't worry about it, I got you. And that's how it came in, and that was where Ravi was doing this business analytics course, right? And we get to know. Then, interesting thing happens. So turns out Kevin is an author. Would anybody know this? Yes. So okay, we're close, but it was of course Rima is a bookseller looking for authors, and Kevin shows up. I'm like, really? That I know Kevin, right? And of course, technically to fiction, fiction.
Fiction.
And turns out his books are some of the best sellers. So, on the way out, not only when you book a Thrive, there's a Minnesota whole section that Rima has curated, and out of there are Kevin's books out there, right? So if you want to pick, but
that's not what we're here for now.
not exactly. But that was interesting. And then one of my favorite things here is that every time there are new releases, I come and kind of see if I can. I've got the first bit. She says, no, Arun, this for customers, but whatever. I'm your biggest customer. But one day I was looking at this, and then this book called Thrive comes in with AI, and just the whole idea was fascinating to me. I look at it and say, oh, Ravi Bapna. Wait a minute, is that our Ravi? I look up, it's like, oh, that's our Ravi. Gosh, you got to do that. And I kind of put on LinkedIn, hoping that he would say, yeah, we can. And putting him to shame, like, yes, I will come and do this town. And he got it, right? So he said, okay, we'll do it. He gave us this date, but here we are. Right, so thank you. I'll let you introduce yourself, Ravi. Awesome to have you guys over.
You go first, Ravi.
All right. So, well, thanks Rima for creating this. I think we should give her a round of applause.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I didn't know about this place before, and I'm sure there's like so many books I want to buy actually. And I think as academics, we don't need a second invitation to come and talk about our papers or our book in this case, right? So I think that's like what we do. So I'm just thrilled to be here amongst friends like so many of you, and for those of you who don't know me, I teach at the Carlson School of Management in the area of information systems and analytics, and I've been there now for 16 years. Actually, former Dean Sri Zahir is here. She was Associate Dean when I was applying for the job, and she was responsible for hiring me and bringing me here to Carlson. So thanks to so many of you. But yeah, just like really happy to be here and talk about Thrive and AI and all the good stuff with Kevin.
Yeah. So my background, real quick, before we get into it, is I'm a 30-year IT practitioner. So I spent like 15 years at Accenture. I'm mostly recovered from that. And then I spent 15 years at United Health Group, ended up as their corporate segment CIO. And then, was kind of burned out on kind of doing that. So kind of lucked into an opportunity to teach at Carlson. And I've been doing that for about 7 years. And it's been kind of a dream come true to then like give back what I've learned to the students. So that's my background, and I think we'll jump into it if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So I thought I would start with, when I read the book, I'm a big sci-fi fan myself, and so much, and not just sci-fi, but so much of the press and everything talks a lot about the negative aspects of AI and what we should be worried about. And when I read this book, it was distinctly positive on AI, and I just wanted to kind of get your, I think, overall thinking on kind of that positive view of AI, which is kind of the opposite of what most books are these days.
Yeah, so I think there were two like main triggers I think that led to this book. And one of which was this, kind of, I guess, dissonance that Onindo, my co-author, by the way, who's at NYU, a good friend, and I, independently in our own like research streams and our work with companies like Optum over the years, and through executive education, have been doing so much impactful like change in companies and how they can leverage their data and convert that into an asset. And we've been doing this for like 20 years, right? So I started teaching what people are calling AI right now. The foundation of that is essentially machine learning. I started teaching machine learning in a business school in around 2004, 2005. And there's been a long journey of bringing in this technology to create a lot of positive outcomes. So that's been like, the first-hand view of what it is for me. And then you see, the narrative in the media that A is going to take away all our jobs, it's going to lead to all this misinformation, and you can name one downside after the other that the media likes to talk about, and many of those things are true, and we don't want to sort of minimize those aspects. But at the same time, there's also this other side where AI can bring a lot of positive change. So I think when we were constantly seeing this narrative in the media, we said that why don't we try to write a book that's targeted for the layperson and try to do it in a way that it gives some agency and understanding to everybody into what's under the hood out there, right? Because part of the challenge with AI, which is a general purpose technology, which means that it can be used to do so many different kinds of things, right? It can be used in every function in a business, it can be used in every, as we show in the book, in like literally every aspect of what we care about as humans, like our work, our education, our jobs, our relationships. Because this general purpose technology, in contrast to prior general purpose technologies like the computer, or if you go back in time all the way to the steam engine or the printing press, all those are very tangible, right? You can see the computer, you can have some sort of a relationship with it, you know what's going on in there. Electricity, you can see what the light bulb turns on. These algorithms that basically make up AI and then influence what you see on Netflix, or whether you get a loan at a bank, or whether you get screened by a resume screening algorithm for a job. These are lurking in the background. They're intangible, like nobody can see them, right? And therefore that creates the space for all kinds of narratives which are at the extremes, right? The tech companies want to probably create maybe a utopian narrative that we're going to have this digital nirvana, self-driving cars, universal basic income. The robots are going to take care of all the dirty work that we don't want to do, and we can sit and read books, right? and that's not true either. And then there's the negative side, and I think the reality is always in the middle. So we thought that if we can try to demystify and explain this in very simple terms, using the lens of everyday life, so that was a big choice in the structure of the book, because we could have written corporate stories as well, which we chose not to do. That essentially motivated us to basically go on this journey. So I think that's the origin of the book, essentially, in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that struck me was most of the examples, and the examples get a little technical, but not super technical, but a lot of them were really human, right? Dating sites and the process of dating and the philosophy behind it, and just about many, even like, listening to music, and I mean, you name it, there was a lot of kind of human connections. What drove the thinking to kind of, or was it intentional to try to have so many of the examples be, very human examples?
Yeah, and absolutely, it was very intentional.
Okay.
And if you look at the title, people, there's well-being in the title, right? So when we were going and talking to publishers and even agents at some point in time, a lot of people thought of this as being like a well-being in the yoga and the meditation and the Zen sense, right? And in fact, the first time I asked GPT to create a cover for this book, because the publisher was taking so long, I said, I'll just do it using AI. It came out with this kind of, like Zen Buddhist, out there, it had a very I love yoga, by the way, nothing wrong with that, but it came out with this kind of title that was going in that direction. But I think for us, well-being was, people are like, I think there's well-being if you have a good job, right? If you can reduce the frictions in that process, if you have great health, right? If you have great relationships, both romantic and non-romantic, right? In our view, like, even though in my view, I think we're both very practical in these matters. We said that, this is human well-being, right? A lot of my economist friends, they love to talk about productivity, but I think the AI impact is bigger than that, right? I mean, because it sort of gets into these things that all of us have to do on a daily basis, right? I don't think there's any person out there who wouldn't care about many of the chapters that we have in the book, essentially, right? Which are around, I mean, so again, the book starts with, we can get into this, but there's obviously a framework, like all academics, we have to have a framework, which I can talk about. But then, the chapters are around relationships, your health, how AI is embedded in many aspects of these things that fundamentally, like, everybody cares about, right? Yeah. So there was a very conscious choice, I think, and I think, and also we wanted to really write an airport book. Like, I'm still just waiting to see my book in some airport in the world. I'm working really hard to get it actually in airports in India. Like, that's my biggest dream, that my mom walks into an airport in India and it's there. And I think the challenge there is, unfortunately, the publishing industry is so archaic and is so complicated. So it's going to happen, by the way. There's an Indian edition of the book that has to be published. It's an English book. Everybody in India reads English. So it's going to be an English book, but it's going to essentially be 1/3 of the price that the American edition costs in India, right? So I finally got an MIT Press and Penguin Random House to, agree on that, but it's just taking so long. So yeah. But it is supposed to be an airport book.
Yeah. All right. So I guess kind of building on that positivity and the optimism, just wanted to get your thoughts on like what you're most excited about in terms of where AI is headed, and like what gets you excited to see what's coming, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, so I think at a very fundamental level, depending on whether you listen to Gartner or to IDC or you listen to the scant academic research that's out there in this topic, companies are only using a very tiny fraction of the data that's being generated by their systems and by other digital technologies that all of us use out there, right? And so for us, and again, having run the Carlson Analytics Lab now for close to a decade and done so much work in this area, there is so much runway in just making better decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? So if we can move the needle on that, then there's tremendous sort of upstream benefits of literally, again, we can go into every aspect that we care about or even companies care about. So I think, so to me, that's actually a lot of, to me, that's something that we have to figure out, right? How do we get this, more people to understand it, to start using it, to, in healthcare, for example, which is a big chapter in the book, right? To just use it to predict disease, right? In,
Right.
the example that I love to talk about when I'm out there is a story actually we picked up in the New York Times, and we looked into the underlying research, is from a clinic called the Mama Clinic in Hungary, which is essentially a clinic that deals with breast cancer in women, and they started using working with a tech team. They developed a deep learning model, which I can explain in just a second, but they developed an AI model to detect breast cancer from essentially mammograms, but also other socioeconomic indicators and other factors that would feed into that kind of a model. And they started very smartly deploying that AI-based approach to detect cancer or not in parallel with all what the work the doctors were doing. And they designed a very nice sort of setup to examine the effect of the AI. And they found many instances that where the doctors, in fact, there were 21 documented instances they found where the doctors missed the detection of breast cancer in those mammograms that the AI picked up, right? So that's literally like 21 lives that were saved right away, right? And nobody in the media really talks about these kind of things, right? I mean, you get the occasional story. So you start thinking about if we can improve our healthcare on the clinical side, and then obviously also on sort of the administrative side, right? And again, the work we were doing with Optum over the years, there's so much runway there as well, right? So for me, that's the source of optimism, that we can really make better decisions on a day-to-day basis across a wide variety of things that we care about, which can then improve well-being.
When I was at Optum, I retired, so I don't know where this ended up, but we were taking, so we were required to save kind of all the phone conversations when people call in.
Yeah.
And we were doing some work running AI against that, and
it was
health,
mental disease, right? I mean, like kind of
health, like various health illnesses.
Yeah.
And found that there was like 12 different conditions that we could identify just from people's voice.
Yeah.
Just from people's voice, it could diagnose
stress levels.
All kinds of different health, like Parkinson's and other things, where people didn't even know they had Parkinson's. So I don't know where it's at today, but I think the possibility, particularly in health, the possibilities are huge to use this much more substantially.
Yeah, and then you can, the next big sort of area we can talk about is education, right? You start thinking about access to education. This year, Sophia's on sabbatical at Columbia and NYU, so we're spending a lot of time in New York. And our daughter, who graduated from NYU, she was doing a side gig where she was tutoring, other wealthy kids in New York City in science and math, and she's making like good money doing that. But imagine, how many families in the country can have access to like a really good personalized tutor to help their kids with science and math, right? It's like a very elite thing at this point in time. But in the education chapter, we start talking about Khan Migo, which is Sal Khan's project out in the Bay Area, who's taken again a lot of publicly available information, his own recordings and so on, and deployed a personalized learning tutor for students in grade school, right? And the idea there is that if a kid is, let's say, really good in math but really shy of reading, does not want to read or does not want to engage with the book, the tutor is designed to maybe help create characters from the book that the student can interact with, right? So you can basically have a conversation, and that might then maybe make them a little bit more amenable to go out and open a book and read a chapter out there, right? Or conversely, like if you're stuck in calculus, that tutor can if you and it's designed with proper guardrails. So if you ask it for the solution, it'll never give you the solution. It'll give you the next question to ask to try to get to the solution of it, right? So we saw examples of that, and in fact, tomorrow I'll be presenting in our strategy department new research paper that we just did, Sophia and I and a very strong team of people, where we basically built an AI agent for managers, right? And we deployed that at scale. We had 400 students who were supposed to take a core course in analytics, the kind of course that I was telling you I've been teaching for 20 years. And for a lot of students, it was really hard in an MBA environment to get comfortable in that course because it was technical. It involved seeing maybe some lines of Python code or R code, and there's a whole there's a whole slew of MBA students who never want to do that, right? So now we literally implemented this idea that English is the new programming language, right? We will create an agent where you can just talk to this agent in English, and it can go ahead and take a lot of data, generate some Python code, execute it, get the answers back to you, and your job then is to make sense out of it, right? So we kind of build that technology already out there, and at least in the early analysis of that data from that project last summer, we are finding a pretty significant impact on managers, future managers like MBA students, essentially their ability to understand analytics, right? Which has been a challenge for a long time.
Yeah.
So education is another big area where I think we can do things at scale, and you start thinking across the world, how much more help we can give to teachers, for example, right?
Well, students, they learn at different paces, right? And that's one of our challenges, I think, in our system, right? Is that we in order to scale our teaching, we try to have certain things that we teach at certain times, and their interests are different, right? So if we can do more personalization and more, if a student's really into math, if we can stop saying like, sorry, that's not till next year, right? We can let them go, right? Use the AI. It can open up, I think, all kinds of learning in students that maybe doesn't happen today, right?
Yeah, and because otherwise, I think the forces in the systems, in the university systems right now are, like, at best you can teach to the sort of middle of the class, right? At best, I think, right? Often we might have to even go lower, right? And there's no need to stick to that, I think. So that's a very exciting, I think, again, so those are, some of the big areas that everybody should be getting about, I think.
Very good. I just wanted to ask and get your thoughts on if you've been surprised at the speed of progress of AI, particularly with generative AI, obviously, which is really popular, and I guess following on to that, do you see that pace of advancement continue?
Yes and no, actually, right? So I think, again, having sort of, been dealing with this for such a long time, actually there were a couple of prior inflection points, like 2011, 2012, we suddenly got to this level of compute that was available that allowed us to make, like order of magnitude improvements in our ability to classify images, right? So that was like the big, the ImageNet challenge was running for a decade, and people were making incremental improvements like 1%, 2% a year. And then Jeffrey Hinton and a few other people at the University of Toronto essentially took this approach, what people are calling deep learning today, which has been around for actually 50 years. So the theory behind many of these models was developed at least 50 years ago, right? But we suddenly had this perfect combination of compute and data and some improvements, significant improvements in the in the algorithm's efficiency, where the ImageNet challenge, just to sort of explain what it is, you're given an image and your job, that the task there is to classify everything in that image that you can see accurately, right? So just we take a picture here, and if the AI, if that challenge says that if you can classify every object here, then you get a full score. So there was a huge improvement all of a sudden when deep learning model was fit to that data, right? That was around 2012, and I think that was the foundation where then we knew that, look, if again, if compute scales in the same order of magnitude, we already have the data, right? Yeah. Doing the data engineering to curate that data is not easy. It takes a lot of time. So that's in our book, that's the core of our framework for thinking about the house of AI. But once we started seeing those order of magnitude improvements with the advent of deep learning, then it meant that you could tackle rich data that is beyond numbers in a spreadsheet, right? So what deep learning allows us to do is to deal with images, to deal with audio, to deal with video, and for every new type of modality of data, you need an order of magnitude more compute, right? So going from image to video is a pretty significant jump. Going from image to audio is again the way the data is stored and compressed and so on. It's a significant jump, right? So as the GPUs that Jensen Huang and NVIDIA had created originally for gaming, those started improving in those order of magnitudes. It was just a matter of time that these things sort of came together. And I think generative AI, so one of the myths actually, when I'm talking publicly about the book, one of the myths that I try to blow up is that it's not just about Gen AI. Even though Gen AI is the hot new thing right now and everybody's excited about it, and it's very easy way to access underlying AI technology, there are many other components that are important. But I think Gen AI is really exciting because people took this idea of predicting language, right? So what is Gen AI? Just to bring everybody on the same page again, it's a model that essentially takes all the corpus of text that ever existed on the internet that OpenAI, for example, could get a handle on, perhaps legally, perhaps illegally. We can talk about that. That's a matter that's in the courts right now. But essentially, in classic Silicon Valley style, let's go ahead and do it. They built a model that would predict essentially the next phrase given a sentence. It can predict like what I'm going to say next, essentially, right? So it took all the written text that's out there, and the language model's job is to predict like what's next, right? And if you just move away from taking that concept of if the input there is initially a phrase, then it can predict the next phrase. If that input is a sound bite, it can predict the next piece of sound, right? So that's how that same approach translates into generating music or generating audio, right? Or if that token, as we call it, is a video, then it can predict like the next sequence in the video out there, right? So I think like for me it was not a surprise that suddenly, but I think obviously a lot of smart people put these technologies that were already out there together to create this interface, right? So and I think a lot of credit has to go, for example, to Satya Nadella, Microsoft, who I think saw the vision of OpenAI and invested like $1 billion to take the large language model technology again that was around for a long time. So the seminal paper in this area is the paper title, "Attention is All You Need," right? So that's the title of the paper, written by a set of people at Google actually and University of Toronto. That paper is 10 years old now. So people knew how to build models to predict language. Given some initial language, it can complete a sentence basically, right? But then OpenAI took those $1 billion that Satya invested initially and hired a lot of humans to interact with that model by giving prompts. And then they basically built another model on top of the core model, the language prediction model, that was learning what is a good response to a prompt or not, right? So again, there's a core language model, and then that was sitting out there, and then OpenAI hired, a huge number of humans, and they had the investment from Microsoft to do it, and their job was to ask questions to these models to make those predictions, and then rank order good predictions from bad predictions. And then there was another, what we call a reinforcement learning model, that was sitting and observing what these humans are doing and mathematically coding that. And once we learned, so basically they learned the rules of figuring out what is good and what is bad by observing these humans doing that task repeatedly, and then build a math model out of that. And those two things together, plus with guardrails, like, right, if you ask it to make a bomb, it'll tell you, no, I'm not going to tell you how to make a bomb. So those guardrails, again, with human feedback, that's what then in the end led to like, okay, now we have something like GPT, and then we can do many more things with it.
Yeah, I guess what surprised me is just the power of language. It really how useful it is in different things. It really shows, like, I think we take language for granted.
Yes.
And you really realize when you work with a generative AI and what's under the covers, that language is really powerful. And that's all it's doing, is it's understanding the importance of the words and the connection of the words.
In the context of everything else,
right.
and in the context of everything that's ever been said,
right.
or written at least, right?
Yeah.
So it's brilliant in that way,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Or it's a giant plagiarism machine, whichever you want
Yeah. And so I think that's the part that I was not surprised about. I think the challenge still is where we are falling behind every day even more is our ability, like for companies to absorb this, right? I think companies, and I started off by saying that again, only, I think according to Gartner, the number is 3% of the data that's already that companies have, is being used for what we call data-driven decision making out there, right? So our ability to create interesting applications from it, that's what we have to be teaching our students, by the way, in our business school, right? So that's a separate conversation. I don't think we're doing enough yet in that area. But I think that gap keeps getting bigger and bigger, and we need to do a lot of things differently. And in fact, the only country I think that I feel is thinking about it in a futuristic way, it turns out, is Singapore, right? So Singapore government has invested, they have a Marshall Plan to educate their existing workforce on creating AI apps, right? They're basically investing in that. That's, I think, what we need more than any other thing that you can do on the regulation front, which again is another thing we can do. Yeah.
Do we want to take a few questions from the audience? Is it a good time? I'll take somebody right away.
Yeah, Derek and I.
Yeah. Right. So, when you talk about open AI, like trying to scour the internet for everything that's ever been written about everything, I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Yeah.
The original COVID vaccines were not littered with fetal cells. I mean, how does the AI determine like what's real and what isn't? And if there's more misinformation out there than true information, how does it tell what's good information?
Yeah, so it goes back to that human in the loop part of the process that was that I was talking about earlier, right? So in the end, this problem itself has to be solved. Like the scale of misinformation that we have, and what AI can do and what it has been trained on, this itself, like, we're going to need more AI and humans working together to solve this, right? So when I said that OpenAI hired tons and tons of people to essentially probe the language model and look at responses that it was getting. The job of those humans, they were getting paid for basically rank ordering those responses back in a way that were basically, in their opinion, proper, right? So to the extent that those people could discern, those humans could discern something from being like fake or real versus like true or false, that's what's baked into it at this point in time, right? But obviously, ongoing investments have to be made, and we have to sort of keep fighting against this force that's going to try to use this in a different way out there, right? So in the training process, again, it goes back to that reinforcement learning model that was built by observing what humans thought was actually a good response versus a bad response, right? And good and bad presumably has some element of whether this makes sense, at least to those humans that were involved in that, right? So that's like the best that we can do at this point in time. But honestly, I think this is going to be another like with all other types of I think like abuse of technology. It's going to be a cat and mouse game, and we have to sort of keep investing in creating got to keep investing in resources so that the good guys can keep winning, essentially, right? Yeah.
And I would just add to it. I'll let you guys get just that they also did some curation of the data, right? They may have started with everything, but as far as like what they actually used in the model, at some point they did some curation and said like, this is not something we'd want to include in our model at some level, in addition to, so, I think it's lots of layers, right? I'm sure they, the guardrails, the human feedback, how, what they care, it's layers and layers of trying to get good data.
Yeah.
So we were all surprised, actually shocked, when the market dropped $1 trillion.
Oh, yeah.
What did DeepSeek do
Yeah.
that allowed them to get such a huge jump on us?
Yeah.
And how did they not have to invest the $1 billion in
Yeah.
the reinforcement model, for example? And what does that say about our systems, or the way we think as a society, that China got this huge jump on us?
Yeah. So so there are many layers to that. I think the dust is finally starting to settle on the initial hype, right? I think even the market is correcting itself as we speak. So there is one school of thought, right, that basically believes that there is, so one of the claims that DeepSeek has made is that it doesn't need the extent of hardware that we all believe is required to build these models and make them really good. Right? That it requires like a tiny fraction of that amount of hardware. And there's a school of thought that believes that actually that's not true. They reported there's supposedly like 50,000 like clusters of NVIDIA chips that are missing, like basically from Singapore, and that's part of what we don't know truly what's happening behind sort of the Chinese iron curtain, so to speak, right? But that aside, their approach is actually using what Kevin was talking about, which is they're relying a lot on synthetic data, right? So they're actually like just if you go back, when DeepMind beat the world's best chess player, a lot of that learning that was happening was because it could generate synthetic data and it could generate games and moves that did exist in all the human recordings of chess players that were out there, right? So part of what DeepSeek's innovation is that it has used synthetic data in a way and used reinforcement learning on top of that synthetic data to at least claim that they don't need that kind of hardware out there, right? I think there's a set of people who don't truly believe that, I think they're overstating their kind of, lack of reliance on that hardware. And in fact, Bill Ackman, a big investor out there, I was following on Twitter, he had a question out there saying that DeepSeek, the original, like DeepSeek company, the parent company is a hedge fund, right? And they probably made a killing on shorting NVIDIA, and so that's the big question mark that's out there, right? 2 days ago, I think so. But I think that's what's happening. That there's a lot of question marks around. Do we truly believe now that these advancements that they're saying are to the extent like it's a 1 in 20 sort of leap, 24 leap in terms of power in this model, right? And I think people are questioning that. But to the broader question of geopolitics, I think what we're learning through this example, and there's another example I can tell you about in the smartphone industry where, for example, the Qualcomm chips, the US government has blocked access to Chinese companies to essentially all these, like the super high-end chips needed to go into smartphones, into clusters that will train large language models. And the Chinese companies have created essentially better smartphones, without those chips already now, right? So what we're learning is that, I think putting these embargoes is actually triggering more innovation and invention happening in the Chinese companies, and it's probably not the best strategy out there, right? And so these embargoes are not working essentially. They're forcing those people to invent, necessity being the mother of invention. They're forcing them to invent in a different way, and it's going to backfire, right? And I'm consistent with that view. I think I buy that, that this is not the way to go. So I think that's kind of what's happening with DeepSeek, I think. So more to come on this, but yeah. So the key thing acts is that I think the role of synthetic data, which has helped them. I think that's like the number one factor.
And why could we not use that?
We could, in fact, that's the thing that, and I think this was Sophia's question. Like this is very replicable. Others can do this as well, right? So that's bad news. If that's truly the case, that's bad news for NVIDIA, or actually bad news for OpenAI, mostly I think in some senses.
Not NVIDIA.
Yeah, NVIDIA as well also. But I think I think no, you should not. I think in fact, hopefully people bought the dip, but I think the applications that are going to be built on these foundation models, right? So there's only so much we can do with GPT on its own, right? But when you start combining that GPT technology to integrate with, let's say, your the best performing call center agents that you have in your companies, then you can do customer service on steroids, right? Those applications, that is the big runway that we have to build, and you're going to need NVIDIA chips to do that actually, and there we're just getting started. So I think there's really no need to for NVIDIA to worry at all. I think yeah.
There's a question here.
I wanted to do a follow-up question on the misinformation
Yeah.
aspect. So you've got human beings rating things.
Yeah.
You've got human beings curating things.
Yeah.
How do they define misinformation? Copernicus was a misinformer for a long time.
Yeah.
And if you look at science, you look at anything else, it's misinformation until all the old guys die, and then it's science.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you deal with that with an AI system? How do you prevent an AI just parroting, the old guys stuff?
It's no different from there's nothing AI specific, I think, to that problem, to me, at least the way I see it, right? I mean, this is a problem that's broadly true. I mean, what is maybe misinformation for me, maybe perfectly logical thinking and coherent answers to somebody else. And at least in our scientific process, we if we are asking people to code something, we're not going to ask one person, we might ask a group of people, and we might take the majority vote amongst that. So there's kind of inter-rater reliability kind of idea that you would have to break in to see that, look, maybe you can fool 3 people, but you can't fool 7 out of 10, right? And that's, I think, the kind of approach that we would have to take. But this is not a straightforward problem to solve. I mean, I think, right? Again, because it's subject to a lot of judgment out there. So yeah.
With applications that a RAG environment.
Yes, yeah. So I think when you get into specific use cases now, and again, if I back up, one of the limitations of these models is that it also makes it really powerful. But one of the limitations is that these models can hallucinate, right? They can make up stuff. I mean, if you ask it for a list of references that talk about the impact of, let's say, a policy on some outcome, it can make anything up. But that's if it's left on its own. But now more and more we have ways to basically again put those proprietary data sets that you own in your company in conjunction with these models and bound the set of references, for example, that it can use, right? I can say that, look, I need you to look at papers published that are available on, let's say, JSTOR, right? And just based on that, give me a set of best practices, for example, right? So I think those are ways by which we can structure the hallucination problem or deal with the hallucination problem that these models have. Yes, Marina.
Yeah, so I have a question about the need for power, electricity,
Yes.
to run all of this AI and how that's going to impact the environment, and then also I've read some things like that AI is going to figure out how to, actually deal with global warming. And so I'm kind of trying to figure all of this out, because it seems like there's an awful lot of extra need for energy to
Yes.
power all of this AI. Is AI gonna help us figure out how to get all this extra, or save energy? I guess that's my hope.
It is. I think to a great extent. I mean, this will be one of the things that people are going to use AI to optimize, right? Amongst many other things that we have out there. Obviously the way these models, at least, DeepSeek aside, all the other models that we have out there, to train them requires, tremendous amounts of electricity, and we have to worry about that. I mean that's a legitimate worry. I think, right? And you see companies like Meta and Google buying up power plants to be able to do this, right? And maybe, again, necessity being the mother of invention. If this is a big cost for them, they will have an incentive to figure out okay, how do we do this in a way that's more sustainable, and so on, right? So, I think this is something that has to play out, I would say. Yeah, but it is a legit concern, I think. Yeah, Himani.
Yeah. I was just looking at your book. You look at health, you look at prediction, relationships. Almost everything is can be handled by algorithms. Even things that we didn't realize, like writing poetry, etc. So, where do you think humans are going to be? What are the kinds of tasks AI can't legitimately do?
So,
And
I
so
think
we require humans for.
Yeah, so my brother is doing a PhD at the in London. He's a piano player and he likes to generate music, and he's doing a PhD in trying to think about generative AI and its role in generating classical Western music. And according to him, the current state of the models is for music as a structure. There is no comparison between what humans can do and what the state of the art AI methods can do up there, right?
Which is better?
The human part. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Good question. Yeah, sorry, I didn't clarify that. I mean, I think, and I think he gets into the details of why that's the case, but part of it is there isn't that. I think representation of music is different from representation of language or any other thing that we have out there, right? So I think we don't have to worry about that. But what we're seeing in the creative industries is, for example, if you're a producer of a movie, you can experiment much more, right? So now, if you have, let's say, good video generation technology, and you have an idea of a scene, you can create 20 versions of that with minor twists, and run some experiments and see which ones resonate more with the audience, or which one you as a director click with more, right? So I think that part is really exciting in the creative industry, that this becomes an augment of the capacity of really good directors, right? And that of course raises the question of, as is it going to be the rich getting richer, or is it going to level up maybe people who are not that good, right? And we don't know yet, I think, in that. But I think that's kind of what we're seeing in the creative industries out there, right? That the representations that we have for things that we like Western classical music, or I think Hindustani music would be hopeless because there isn't any written record of, for example, Indian classical music, right? At least there are music score sheets for Beethoven or whatever, right? So, but those are not enough right now for to generate good quality music. So that's a very interesting space in the creative industry.
Science and technology, and so you've excluded all of, in a sense, from what humans would really be good at.
I'll just throw out another thing, which is having been in technology management leadership for 30 years, traditional code, classical computing, right? Programmers write the rules, and it runs the same every time, right? So once something is tested and we're confident with it, we can kind of leave it alone, right? And companies do that, right? We get a system in place and we leave it alone for 20 years. But with AI, right, it's building the rules based on the data, and depending on how we code it, we might allow it to change the rules on the fly based on the data. That's what makes it smart, and that's what makes it kind of more interesting maybe than classical computing. But that also means that it can start doing things differently. So I think a very human thing that's going to happen is we're going to be babysitting AI. We're going to be auditing it. We're going to be managing it. We're going to be reviewing what it's doing on a really regular basis. We can't just let it, you can't put an AI system in place and leave it for 20 years like you could with classical systems. Somebody had a question. He's been waiting very patiently.
Yes, I was going to ask you, I'm doing research in building intelligent textbooks. Imagine a typical college course. You take the textbook, you upload it, you build a knowledge graph of it, and then you build a chatbot that traverses that. And we're finding that these intelligent textbooks are very easy to generate with the new generation of generative AI models. They're fantastic, very interactive, generating simulations and animations and all this stuff. Our challenge here is that we're asking the question, if we can hyper-personalize education, which we will do in 2 to 3 years, who should own the student historical data? Any thoughts on that?
Just to kind of manage their journey through the learning.
Yeah, so for example,
Clearly the universities.
well, this is
I might be biased.
should
So what is your choice set? Like, is it the instructor? Is it the university? What is it the ed tech company that's providing this?
I'll give you 5 options.
Yeah.
One is the textbook publisher.
Uh-huh.
Second is the professor who teaches the class.
Mm-hmm.
The third is the university organization that issues the class. The fourth is the college or the cloud provider that owns the data.
Yeah.
And the fifth is the student itself.
Yeah.
And the key thing is there have been frameworks like Tim Berners-Lee's Solid framework,
Yeah.
which gives persons certificates to allow a service to use their personal information for a short period of time,
Yeah.
to hyper-personalize,
Yeah.
and then revoke those certificates from an institution when they're done.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought about it enough to give you a definitive answer, but I think I would lean towards sort of the last option that you gave, which is which is the students essentially, right?
Yeah.
In the end, I mean, this is a bigger conversation about, who owns the data that like Meta is monetizing and making these billions of dollars, based on your engagement on Instagram, right? For example, right? I mean, there isn't any, like, nothing coming back to the users in that sense out there, right? So I think there are like people who have thought about this, have thought about models where you can have some sort of an exchange out there, right? But I think it's going to be a matter of debate for sure. It's not clear cut, and I'm sure like university administrators and others, and I mean, I don't know, instructors probably, at least like as an instructor personally, I couldn't care less. Like, I think, right? I mean, that's not something that I want to own and do anything with it. Except to improve the models, perhaps, right? Have access to improve the models. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The most valuable asset of a textbook is the frequently asked questions and
Yes.
how they're mapped to solutions.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you love that information?
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't need to own the data to sort of,
You don't need to associate with a specific student.
Exactly.
What would the student do with that? The thing is, if we give the control entirely to the student, then we'll never have an opportunity to improve the models. So we want to be able to improve the models. So.
Yeah.
Good point.
I'll just throw out one thing, which is that particular question has been bounced around in healthcare for 20 years. Who owns the healthcare data?
Yeah.
And it's still not solved. I mean, Microsoft made a run at trying to create a vault that us as individuals could own our own health data. And the problem is systems are changing and advancing, and companies and structures are changing so fast that it's just not been feasible at all to do that. But it's the same issue in healthcare. Does the doctor own it? Does the health plan own it? Does the consumer own it? So you can look at that space and for some information, but I think the problem is they haven't solved it either.
Yeah, and just a quick point on that. I mean, I think, Kevin, what we're starting to see in some countries, like, I think one of the things like India is doing really well is creating these digital public infrastructures, which they've done for identity and they've done for payments right now. It's like the state-of-the-art, best payment network in the world, interoperable, no dominant player. The next thing they're going to tackle out there is credentials, right? And of skills, for example, right? Which can be, basically owned by the person who has it, and can be verified by employers and so on, right? So there's like, but you go ahead, got a question.
So we're pretty much out of time. I think we can maybe take 1 or 2 more questions, and then then we're
And
gonna.
then there'll be a beeline for signing.
Yeah.
So Robbie has to be somewhere at 7:30.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, so one thing I've been kind of musing about, because I've worked in IT for probably almost 30 years now, and I've seen probably the three major technology waves. Everyone had a, PC on the desk, but it couldn't do much if you really wanted to understand and manipulate information. That would be connected to a mainframe or a set of servers or something. Move from that to Twitter with a web browser that connects to something, and now you get to the point of where the web browser is there to connect to many things. And I start to think, with agents becoming the waves now, where people are saying, I need to go create 10 agents, 20 to 30 to go do all these things. You could almost imagine a time, it's already happening if you look on X or some of the other social media. I'm gonna put an agent together to go crawl a bunch of websites, pull information from me, write it to a database over here, then marry it up with something else over here, and stuff that would take you hours or days to do. So I back away from that and say, we have this great thing that is running along at, let's say, some fraction of the speed of light, but the human brain, the human culture, the human organizational model is over here and hasn't yet figured out how to keep up with that thing that 10% of the technology population has figured out is moving that fast, and they're keeping up with it. The rest that people aren't. The example I'm thinking of is, you mentioned companies that want to put AI somewhere into their organization. Did they have to sit there and ask the question first before you even think about doing it? Walk up with a blank whiteboard, blank piece of paper and say, what do we know about how our company really operates and runs right now, so that we can figure out where are the places where we can put this in that maximize the gains while minimizing the disruption. It's a simple question to ask.
This sounds like a whole course. Like you might have to teach a course at Carlson to answer this question. Yeah.
But
it's a good question.
What I struggle with is, how do humans begin to ask the right 3 or 4 or 5 questions to begin to figure out, if I want this in my organization, in my school, in my company, and whatever, am I really ready to even take the first step? Because I see this thing moving week by week, new things come out, and as a generalist or a lay person out there, I can't keep up with it. I mean, I do because I'm a geek, but the people out there, they can't keep up with it. And how do you get them ready to understand that the movement of that is huge velocity, but the human brain and human organization can only move so fast and absorb it.
Right, and on the flip side, I think in the age of AI, the best we can do is be human, like to gather in communities like this and have conversations, right? I mean, I think David Brooks had a wonderful piece in the New York Times that's usually like what I keep telling my students, right? Like, learn how to like just communicate socially, right? And I think that skill set I think is going to be at a premium, right? And I think in companies too, like people who ask the right questions, like if we can train our students to ask great questions, then I think we can solve them actually, right? So I think maybe you're onto something there.
Yeah. So I know you have more questions, but I think we're out of time. So I just wanted to thank Ravi. We could spend all night with him. Right? I also wanted to thank Rima, and when you're before the night's over, just spend a minute looking around this bookstore. It's immaculately designed, and I always feel like it was just designed for me, So take a moment and look at this, kind of look around the bookstore. But Ravi's going to be here for a bit, so if you want to pick up a book and have him sign it, that's I think what's next up, right?
What choice of things?
Oh, wow.